Her father died a hero, but for 9 years the world believed he was the one who failed. Behind it all stood a polished CEO who traded safety for profit and silenced the truth with forged documents. But when a forgotten ledger and an unexpected visitor unlocked what was hidden, his daughter turned quiet grief into a fight for justice. And you won't believe how this buried story finally rose to the surface, and why truth at last refused to look away.
It was raining hard that evening in Mapo, the kind of steady, tapping rain that made the city feel smaller and lonelier. The air smelled faintly of wet concrete and cigarette smoke drifting from the neighbor's balcony. Choi Min-seo had just come off a 12-hour shift in the NICU and was sitting barefoot on her heated floor, cradling a mug of barley tea she hadn't yet sipped. Her uniform was in the laundry basket, her hair damp from the quick shower she'd taken with the lights off. She had just leaned back when someone knocked, not loudly but deliberately. Not the clumsy rap of a delivery driver or the lazy tap of a neighbor. This knock had rhythm, purpose. She waited. The knock came again. 3 slow taps, then silence, then one more. Curious more than alarmed, Min-seo rose and looked through the peephole. A man stood just outside the threshold, tall, lean, in a gray raincoat too neat for this weather. His dark hair was pressed flat by the downpour, and thin silver-framed glasses caught the porch light. When she didn't open immediately, the man lowered his head slightly, as if to acknowledge her caution. His voice, when he finally spoke through the intercom, was low and careful. "Choi Min-seo, I believe we need to talk." Something about the way he said her name made her hand freeze on the doorknob. No one said it like that, as if it had been sitting at the back of their throat for days, weeks. Still, she opened the door halfway, keeping the chain on. "Yes?" The man offered a faint smile, though it didn't reach his eyes. He bowed slightly, respectfully. "My name is Han Ji-tai. I'm an independent auditor working with a municipal review task force. I'm sorry to show up without notice. I wouldn't do this if I had another way." Before she could ask what he was talking about, he said something that made her blood chill. "Your father," he said gently, "was Choi Dong-yin. He died on May 12th, 9 years ago. You were 21. He left behind a rusted metal toolbox that you still keep under your kitchen sink." The cup nearly slipped from her fingers. She tightened her grip. "Who are you?" she asked again, quieter this time. He didn't move. "I need to show you something. Please, just a few minutes." She unchained the door and let him in, not because she trusted him, but because his calmness felt practiced, not threatening. And because he had said her father's name like it meant something. Inside, he didn't sit and she didn't offer. He stood just past the door, removing his wet glasses and wiping them with a handkerchief. "I've been reviewing documents related to the Yongdonpo gym collapse," he began. "It happened last March. You might have seen it on the news. A concrete ceiling gave way during a group training session. Several people were injured. One of them didn't survive." Min-seo nodded. She remembered. It had made her stomach twist, another preventable tragedy swallowed by the news cycle. "That collapse," Ji-tai continued, "led to a quiet investigation. We followed the construction records back to a much older development firm, Songhwa Development. Your father worked there, yes?" She said nothing. Ji-tai didn't need confirmation. "I found something strange. Your father's name appears in permits dated after he was already gone. Stamps, signatures, initials. All perfectly formatted, all perfectly fake." Now she did speak. "He didn't sign anything after he died." "Exactly," Ji-tai said softly. "Someone used his name, used his reputation, and then erased him. Every trail that leads to your father ends abruptly, as if he was meant to take the blame for something. As if someone needed him gone, on paper and off it." The silence in the room was thick. Rain hammered the window like a warning. "I thought it was a clerical error at first, but then I saw this." Ji-tai carefully pulled a worn folder from his satchel. He opened it, revealing a photocopy of an official construction permit, stamped with the name Choi Dong-yin, dated precisely 2 days before his death. I cross-checked this with hospital records, Jitai said. On that day, your father was home with the flu. No one signed anything. Min-seo stared at the page. She knew that handwriting. She had watched her father fill out school forms with that exact slant of the pen. She also knew he would never sign something he didn't read, especially not blind. So the stamp was forged, she said. Her voice was hoarse. Yes, Jitai confirmed. And that means someone inside Songhua was covering their tracks, using your father as a shield. She looked up at him. Why tell me this? His answer came without hesitation. Because you're the only one who might know what he left behind. The only one who can connect what's missing. I've chased ghosts through city archives, half-shredded contracts, corrupted hard drives. Your father didn't just vanish. Someone erased him. Min-seo said nothing for a long time. Then she turned to face the narrow kitchen. She hadn't opened that toolbox in years, not since the funeral. Her brother hadn't wanted it, and her mother wouldn't touch it. Something about that box had always felt unfinished. She turned back to Jitai. You said you were an auditor. You do this for a living. He met her eyes, a flicker of something personal behind them. I used to, he said. I stopped when it got too close. She didn't ask what that meant, not yet. But a door had opened, not just in her apartment, but in her understanding of what her father might have died for, and what had been hidden ever since. And the man who knocked? He hadn't come to bring news. He'd come to wake the truth up.
The rusted metal box had been part of the apartment for so long that Min-seo had stopped seeing it. It lived beneath the sink, tucked beside extra detergent and plastic bags. Once, when she was younger, she tried to throw it out, but her mother had stopped her with a single word: no. Now, with Han Jitai standing in the doorway of her narrow kitchen, she crouched and pulled it free. It scraped softly against the tiles, not loud, but enough to stir the dust of years that had settled between their silences. The toolbox was heavier than she remembered. The latch stuck at first, and when she forced it open, the metal gave a groan, long and aching, like it remembered being opened by different hands. Inside, everything was where it had always been. Her father's wrenches, still smeared faintly with oil, pencils worn down to stubs, a tape measure with the numbers nearly rubbed off. And beneath it all, wrapped in a faded cloth like something sacred, lay a ledger. And beside it, a USB drive, tightly sealed in old electrical tape. Jitai didn't speak. He simply moved closer, watching as Min-seo carefully unwrapped the ledger. The pages inside were thick and slightly yellowed. Ink had bled into the fibers, but the writing was precise, a draftsman's touch. Her father's hand. She recognized it instantly. Neatly written rows filled every page: dates, locations, site codes, inspection grades, and remarks. It wasn't the format that caught her breath. It was the symbol beside certain entries, a small triangle, just a few scattered throughout the book. Her voice came out quieter than she expected. These marks. He used them as warnings, Jitai said. Triangle meant something wasn't right, something ignored, unsafe. Min-seo blinked. She remembered being a little girl sitting on the floor while her father sketched blueprints on scrap paper. He used to draw her houses made of triangles. When she asked why the shape mattered, he told her, a triangle doesn't collapse unless someone removes one side. Jitai gently took the USB drive and unwrapped it. Let's see what else he left. They moved to her dining table, the air heavy with memory. She plugged in the drive. A single folder appeared. Inside it, 2 files. The first was labeled simply, for Min-seo. She clicked it open. It was a letter, not handwritten, but typed, as if he had been in a hurry. But it began with a word that caught in her throat. Min-seo ya. If you're reading this, then I didn't come back. I'm sorry. She stared at the screen, her hands frozen. Jitai sat across from her now, but silent, like someone attending a funeral. They wanted me to approve materials for the Yunhai Community Center, but the concrete mix was off. I knew it. I told them it wasn't safe, not for a public building, not where children go after school and the elders gather. They offered me one last bonus,
Said I was close to retirement, said I should do it for my family. The letter paused, like her father had hesitated before continuing. I said no. Then I got a call. They didn't threaten directly, they never do. But I knew what blacklisting meant. I wasn't scared for myself, but I was scared for your mother, for you. If anything happens, this ledger is the map, it's proof. Don't trust the easy answers. Trust Hae-suk. She always knew more than she said. Her mother. Min-seo's lips parted, but no sound came. Her throat felt thick with something she couldn't name. She had always known her father as quiet, reliable, a man who smelled of concrete dust and coffee. But this was something else entirely, a man standing at the edge of a cliff, refusing to fall with the others. She clicked open the second file. It was a scanned document, stamped and signed. The emblem of Songhua Development sat in the top right corner like a seal. Her father's name was mentioned in the body of the contract, but the recipient of the settlement payment was listed clearly at the bottom. Kim Hae-suk, her mother. Min-seo leaned back from the screen. She hadn't been prepared for this, not for names like that to sit so closely to each other, not for dates that lined up like puzzle pieces she didn't want to solve. Her mother had always kept the bills paid, somehow. Rent never went overdue. School tuition had appeared on time. When Min-seo was accepted into nursing school, her mother had simply nodded and said, "Your father would be proud." Had that pride been paid for? Beside her, Ji-tai's hands were folded, but his knuckles had turned white. "I didn't want you to find this alone," he said quietly. If she accepted the money, maybe she had no other choice. Life doesn't give people time to grieve, not when bills keep coming. Min-seo didn't answer. She was no longer fully in the room. She was 12 again, standing outside her parents' bedroom, hearing them argue in voices low and tired. She hadn't understood the words, only the tension. The way her mother had sat silently at the table the next morning, eyes red, fingers curled around a chipped teacup. She remembered asking about the funeral arrangements. Her mother had said, "Just let me take care of it." Now she understood why there had been no wrongful death claim, no lawsuit, no fight. The silence hadn't been peace. It had been bought. Min-seo reached forward and shut the laptop. The screen blinked dark, but the knowledge didn't fade. Her hands trembled slightly as she pulled them into her lap. She didn't cry, not yet. The tears were waiting behind something sharper. Everything she thought had been buried, grief, certainty, trust, was shifting beneath her like unstable ground. The kind of shift that happens before something falls. And in that quiet apartment, filled with the echo of old tools and newer truths, Choi Min-seo sat beside a man she barely knew and realized that nothing she believed about her father's death had ever truly belonged to her. Not until now.
The kitchen hadn't changed in years. Same pale green tiles with hairline cracks, same weak overhead light that buzzed faintly when the kettle boiled. Kim Hae-suk placed a ceramic cup of barley tea on the table and took her seat across from her daughter as if this were any other evening, as if nothing was waiting between them. But the envelope was there, thick, worn, unfolded now, its corners bent from Min-seo's grip. Her mother pretended not to see it. Min-seo didn't drink the tea. She waited. When she finally spoke, her voice was too calm, the kind of calm that only comes when a storm is held back by force. "Why didn't you tell me?" Hae-suk's eyes dropped to the table. Her hands, always steady when folding laundry or slicing radish, trembled just slightly. "It wouldn't have changed anything," she said. Min-seo pulled out the printed copy of the settlement agreement and slid it across the table like evidence in a courtroom. Her mother didn't touch it. She just stared, not at the words, but through them, as if they were already memorized. "I took it," she said finally, her voice rough with effort. "I took the settlement." There was no denial, no pretense, only exhaustion, like a wound that had been waiting too long to be acknowledged. Why? The answer didn't come easily. It rose slowly, like water filling a cracked vessel. Because your father was already gone. Because the rent was 3 months overdue. Because your acceptance letter to nursing school arrived the same week the grocery bill doubled and your brother needed braces we couldn't afford. Because I had 2 children and no income and no time to grieve. I told myself it was severance for a life that didn't get the ending it deserved. Min-seo's hand curled into a fist beneath the table. "You told me to be proud of him," she said quietly. "Every time I got tired, every time I doubted myself, you told me to be proud. Proud that he didn't bend, proud that he had principles. What was I supposed to do with that? Build a life on it while you made a deal in secret?" Her mother's lips pressed together, as if biting back the first response, the one that would come from hurt, not reason. When she finally spoke, it was almost a whisper. "I wanted you to remember the man, not the moment we lost him." Min-seo's jaw tightened. "So you let them win." "No," Hae-suk said more firmly now. "I let us survive." A long silence settled between them. Min-seo's eyes burned, but she didn't cry. Instead, memories surfaced uninvited. The landlord who had stopped knocking on the door 3 days after the funeral. The sudden arrival of new shoes before her nursing exams. The electricity that stayed on when she'd expected it to vanish. How had she not seen it? The anger that rose inside her wasn't loud, but it had sharp edges. It didn't yell or slam doors. It cataloged. Anger at Seo Jae-guk, who cut corners and called it business. At the inspectors, who looked the other way for a warm meal in a thick envelope. At her mother for choosing silence over justice. At herself for living in the comfort that silence bought and never asking who paid for it. But anger without aim is just heat, and Min-seo needed direction, not just blame. Ji-tae found the word she couldn't. He had remained in the living room, giving them space, but now he stepped forward, holding a printed page with trembling fingers, one more file from the USB. "I wasn't going to show this yet," he said, his voice low, "but you deserve to know." The page showed structural reports, steel grading, concrete stress tests from the Eunhae Community Center. It detailed how cheaper materials had been signed off despite failing minimum standards. The building had passed inspection by technicality, not truth. Ji-tae's voice grew quieter. "My older sister ran a weekend dance class there. She taught elementary kids. She loved that job." He looked up. "She died that day, 5 of her students with her." Min-seo felt the floor shift. "I became an auditor because I needed to understand how that could happen," Ji-tae continued. "I followed signatures, traced invoices. I got close to another Songhua site, saw the same patterns. When I refused to approve it, I was fired, blacklisted, same tactic." He exhaled like it hurt. "I haven't slept through the night since." His grief didn't shout. It was steady, contained, but deeper than she could measure. And suddenly, her own pain felt less isolated, shared even, like 2 lives had been running parallel through different tunnels and finally met in the dark. Ji-tae looked at both women. "This isn't just a story of your father anymore," he said. "It's a story of how long a lie can echo." Min-seo looked back at the ledger. Her father's handwriting stared up at her, sharp, deliberate, full of warnings no one had heeded. And her mother's signature, quiet and reluctant, on the bottom of a paper that had silenced the fight. They had both made choices. And now it was her turn. They spent the rest of the night building a plan on the table where they used to eat dinner. They laid out timelines, scanned documents, categorized names and motives. Seo Jae-guk's motive was obvious: cut costs, push deadlines, feed shareholders. It was business in its coldest form. The city inspectors had enabled it, turning safety into a signature and ignoring every triangle her father drew. Hae-suk's motive was less sinister, but just as human: survive, keep the lights on, keep her children safe in a world that did not protect widows. And Ji-tae? His motive wore grief like a uniform. He wasn't here for revenge. He was here for the truth, even if it broke everything open. As Min-seo stared at the evidence on the table, her anger didn't fade. But it shifted. It had shape now, and shape, she realized, could be used. She stood, not just as a daughter anymore, but as someone who had inherited a fight and finally had the map.
The air inside the Seoul Western District Prosecutor's office was overly bright and overly cold, the kind of place where people wore formality like armor and truth needed paperwork to breathe. Still, Choi Min-seo, Han Ji-tae, and Kim Hae-suk stepped through the glass doors with copies of the ledger tucked inside a plain envelope, like a quiet declaration of war. The prosecutor assigned to review their case was Yoon Ga-in, sharp-eyed, barely 30, with a voice that moved faster than her pen. She took the documents, one by one, the forged permits, the hidden USB files, the handwritten ledger marked with small, deliberate triangles. With each page, her brows drew lower. "This is heavy," she murmured, finally looking up. "You're pointing a spotlight at people who don't think they can be touched." Min-seo's reply was steady. "Then we aim it well." Yoon nodded, her face unreadable. "This will take time, but if even half of this is verified, someone's gonna feel it." They left the office under the hard gaze of CCTV cameras and afternoon sun, a sun that suddenly felt brighter than it had the right to. But the warmth didn't last. That night, as the city settled into neon and exhaust, a black sedan pulled up beneath Min-seo's apartment. It waited, silent, idle. At first, she thought it was just a delivery car or someone lost. But then her intercom buzzed, not once, not urgently, but like someone pressing a finger out of habit. She answered. A man's voice came through, smooth, calm, practiced. "Miss Choi," he said, as if they were already acquaintances. "CEO Seo Jae-guk would like to speak with you. He remembers your father fondly. He believes this misunderstanding can be resolved privately." There was something too relaxed in his tone, like someone used to skipping lines indoors. Min-seo's heart didn't race. It stilled. She stepped closer to the speaker. "I remember my father too," she said, her voice low and unwavering. "He's the reason I know how to hold a fragile life without dropping it. You can tell Mr. Seo I'm not the one who should be nervous." She pressed the disconnect button before he could reply. The next morning, the invitation arrived by courier. A slim envelope, cream-colored, no return address. Inside, an embossed card, a location, a time. Songhua HQ, 21st floor, 11 a.m. sharp. No threat, just an offer. But they went. Songhua Development's headquarters rose like polished arrogance in the heart of Gangnam, a building of reflective glass and confidence. The 21st floor was sleek and soundless, lit in soft white and citrus-scented. No one asked for ID, no one offered coffee. The receptionist waved them through without a word. Seo Jae-guk stood by the window when they entered, looking down at the city as if he owned the rhythm of its lights. He turned with a smile, professional, warm, controlled. His suit was tailored, his expression curated. He greeted Min-seo first, holding her name in his mouth like a teacher gently correcting a student. "Miss Choi, your father was a proud man. We respected him a great deal. Sometimes proud men sign things they later regret. We tried to help afterward when the accident occurred. Your mother understood. There's no scandal here, only grief." Only grief. Min-seo didn't blink. Ji-tae stepped forward, calm but relentless. "Then why forge his signature while he was at home with a fever?" he asked, sliding a printed copy across the table between them. Seo didn't react. He lifted the page, glanced at it, then set it down gently.
Everyone meets with clients, he replied. Everyone trusts seals and signatures. What is truth really in a city that wants everything done by yesterday? The room held its breath. Min-seo leaned forward, her eyes never leaving his. Truth, she said, is a father who came home with dust in his lungs and didn't say a word because he was protecting something. Truth is a daughter who remembers washing his jacket and finding fine powder in the seams, from a site he was pulled from because he said no. Truth is a ledger with warnings no one listened to. So looked at her, finally, directly. The smile slipped just for a moment. Miss Choi, he said, voice softening into something more dangerous. These things are complicated. Even noble people make compromises. That's how the city moves forward. No, she said, standing. That's how buildings fall. They left the room without another word. In the elevator, none of them spoke. The silence was dense, not empty, but charged. When the doors opened to the lobby, a man in a navy coat brushed past Han Ji-tae, close enough to murmur something only he could hear. Auditors who make noise don't work long. Ji-tae stopped walking for a breath. His expression didn't change. But that night, they found deep scratches around the lock of Min-seo's apartment door. Not deep enough to break in, just enough to be noticed. A reminder, a signal. Min-seo didn't call the police. She made 2 copies of the ledger and put them in separate locations. One went to Prosecutor Yoon, the other into a bank box. She locked the original in a fireproof drawer and laid her father's triangle-marked page on top. Because names could be erased and truth could be rewritten. But if someone was willing to say it out loud, again and again, until it stuck.
By the following Tuesday, the city began to wake up. It started not with a headline, but with motion. Prosecutors in navy jackets walking out of Sanghua Development's headquarters, carrying computers, hard drives, binders full of contracts, all handled like evidence, not business assets. The footage aired across morning news, while anchors tried to keep their expressions neutral as they said words usually reserved for darker headlines. Kickbacks, negligence, criminal liability, corporate manslaughter. On the evening broadcast, they showed the rusted fence of the Yunhai Community Center, the one that had held a crumbling roof above children and elders alike. Taped to its gate were white paper cranes, fluttering in the humid breeze, each one marked with a name, a message, or a triangle drawn in blue ink. And then, in a quiet but pointed segment, Prosecutor Yoon Ga-yeon appeared behind a podium, holding up a single photocopy, the forged permit with Choi Dong-yeon's stamp on it, dated the week he was home with the flu. This document, she said, became the hinge of the case. Everything bent around the lie that followed it. Back in their apartment, Kim Hae-suk sat at the kitchen table, the one where she had once folded bills and hope in equal measure. In her hands was the original settlement letter, the paper that had haunted their family in silence for nearly a decade. Without a word, she folded it. Once, then again, and again, smaller each time, as if turning something loud into something she could finally put away. "I'll testify," she said, voice clear. "I'm tired of holding my breath." Min-seo didn't respond. She simply nodded, not out of forgiveness, not yet, but out of shared release. The silence between them, once full of unsaid things, now held something new, permission to exhale. Weeks passed. The court proceedings were faster than expected, not because the evidence was rushed, but because the patterns were impossible to ignore once exposed. Investigators traced the flow of performance bonuses that aligned with skipped inspections, cut corners, and dangerous substitutions. Witnesses came forward. Former employees testified under sealed protection. When Seo Jae-guk stood before the court, he looked smaller, not just in stature, but in presence. The courtroom lights weren't built for pageantry. They made truth harder to dodge. He pled to reduce charges, and though he avoided the longest possible sentence, he would serve prison time. 2 inspectors lost their licenses permanently.
Several executives quietly resigned, their names scrubbed from websites, but not from memory. Sanghua Development issued an official apology. But their concrete, this time, was poured publicly, under the scrutiny of city inspectors, prosecutors, and citizen watchdogs, to rebuild the Yunhai Community Center. The structure would rise again, with proper beams, real foundations, and no hidden cracks. Not because they wanted to, but because they were made to. In a smaller courtroom, on a quieter day, a judge reviewed a final request submitted by Yun Ga-yun on behalf of the Choi family. The court ordered Choi Dong-yun's employment record amended, his cause of death updated to reflect a pending investigation tied to workplace intimidation and misconduct. More than that, his name, which had once sat in legal documents under a column labeled Possible Liability, was now officially repositioned under a new line, Warning Ignored. It didn't erase what had happened. It didn't bring him back. But it removed the shadow that had hovered over his memory for years. And sometimes, justice doesn't roar. Sometimes, it simply puts things back where they always should have been. That evening, Han Ji-tai appeared at Min-seo's apartment. The same door, the same narrow corridor where this all began. But this time, there was no rain. Only the soft hum of a city that had momentarily paused, not to grieve, but to notice. He stood there, envelope in hand. He said quietly, "Your father gave this to me," he said. "Asked me to give it to you if I ever could. He was my mentor when I first started in site inspections. Taught me how to read danger, not just in measurements, but in silence." Ji-tai's voice caught for a moment, then settled. "He taught me the triangle mark." She took the envelope. It was thin, yellowed slightly at the edges. Not sealed, only folded. Her name was written on the front in blocky handwriting she hadn't seen since she was 19. Inside was a single sheet, typed, brief. "Min-seo, if truth knocks on your door, let it in. Even if it knows more than you do at first. Learn fast. Keep your hand steady. When they call you stubborn, wear it like a compliment. Appa. Triangle." She read it twice, then again, and again. The triangle at the end wasn't just a symbol. It was a signature. Min-seo let out a small laugh, unexpected, soft, and tight in the chest. The kind that hurt and healed at the same time. She could almost see him again, bent over a toolbox, sorting screws by length as if order could keep a world upright. He hadn't been perfect, he hadn't been safe, but he had refused to disappear. She looked at Ji-tai, eyes glassy but strong. "Thank you," she said. He bowed slightly, not out of formality, but out of weight, as if her thank you had mass. The next morning, the NICU was quiet. Min-seo moved between incubators with practiced ease. Her hands didn't shake as she adjusted the tube for a baby no heavier than a loaf of bread. Monitors blinked softly, steady as heartbeats. Life, in its most fragile form, surrounded her. Outside the window, cranes moved in slow arcs over construction sites. The city, always rebuilding, always demanding more. But inside her, something had shifted. She had seen what happened when warnings were ignored, and now she knew the cost of silence. She would never forget. Somewhere in her bag, tucked between her badge and her notebook, was a copy of her father's triangle-marked page, a reminder, a promise. And if someone knocked on her door again, with secrets, with danger, or with grief wrapped in truth, she would open it, not because she trusted the world, but because now she trusted herself to measure what entered. The air didn't feel lighter. It felt newly built.